Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Today what we are going to talk about is confronting marginalization. In the previous chapter, understanding marginalization, we talked about what marginalization is. We talked about how different communities in society are marginalized. We talked about their experience of being excluded or dominated. We talked about their experience of discrimination and exploitation. So in this chapter, Confronting Marginalization, we are going to talk about the means and the ways these marginalized groups resort to fight oppression, to fight discrimination, to confront marginalization. So though powerless, these groups have often fought, protested, and struggled against being dominated, against being marginalized. So without taking much of your time, let's directly come to the means and the ways these marginalized groups resort to fight oppression, to fight exclusion, to fight marginalization. And these are, number one, invoking fundamental rights. Number two, laws for marginalized. In this section, we'll be talking about schemes and reservation policy. And then we'll be talking about protecting the rights of, we'll be discussing protecting the rights of Dalits and Adivasis. So in this section, we'll be talking about scheduled caste and scheduled tribe, prevention of Atrocities Act 1989. And finally, in this chapter, we'll be talking about Adivasi demands and the 1989 Act. So first, we'll talk about invoking fundamental rights, how marginalized groups invoke fundamental rights to get their rights protected, to advance their interests. So now let's talk about invoking fundamental rights. Dear students, Indian Constitution lays down certain principles and fundamental rights that establish India as a democratic country. Fundamental rights are, universal in nature, means they are available to all without any discrimination, means fundamental rights do not make discrimination between people on the basis of caste, color, creed, religion, gender, or socio-economic background. So as far as marginalized groups are concerned, they have drawn on these fundamental rights in two ways. So number one, they have, by insisting on their fundamental rights, they have forced the government to recognize the injustice done to them. Number one. And number two, they have insisted the government that it enforces the fundamental rights to protect their rights, to advance their interests. I mean the interests of the marginalized groups. Students, sometimes in some cases, the actions, the struggle of the marginalized groups have influenced the government to frame new laws in keeping with the spirit of the fundamental rights, to protect the fundamental rights, to protect the interests and demands of these marginalized groups. So now let's talk about, let me give you an example how marginalized groups have resorted to fundamental rights. Let me give you an example of how Dalits have invoked fundamental rights to advance their interests, to protect their rights. For example, Article 17. So before we talk of the Article 17, let me tell you something about the fundamental rights. Indian Constitution under Part 3 from Articles 12 to 35 deal with the fundamental rights. So the first fundamental right guaranteed to the people of India, to the citizens of India, is the right to equality. Right to equality is one of the fundamental rights. So it is mentioned in the articles from 14 to 18. And in this right to equality, there is an Article 17 that abolishes the practice of untouchability. So under this article, it is prohibited to practice untouchability in any form. No one can now, since Article 17 is there, prohibiting the practice of untouchability in any form, it means that nobody can prevent these Dalits from educating themselves, entering temples, or using public facilities, and so on. Practicing untouchability is a punishable crime now. So if anybody is convicted of offense of the untouchability, he can be disqualified from the election to the state legislature, to the parliament. Besides, if anybody is found practicing untouchability and is convicted of doing the same offense, he or she will be punished, imprisoned for 6 months, or can also be fined, or both of them can happen to them who practice untouchability. Okay, there are other articles of the Indian Constitution that can be used to strengthen the argument against the untouchability. For example, Article 15 is there. Article 15 of the Indian Constitution states that the law will not discriminate between people on the basis of caste, color, creed, gender, religion, or socio-economic background. So under Article 15, these groups, marginalized groups, especially the Dalit groups, they invoke Article 15 wherever or whenever they feel that this equality has been denied to them. So as I said, that Dalits can invoke the right to equality, especially the Article 17 of the Indian Constitution, and or the Article 15 of the Indian Constitution as well, to protect their rights, to advance their interests. So, but there are other minority groups also, either minority groups also, that can invoke fundamental rights to further their interests, to protect their own interests. For example, but they particularly invoke the right to freedom of religion, freedom of religion. It's one of the fundamental rights given by the Constitution of India to its citizens under Article 25 to 28. And there is one more fundamental right that these minority groups resort to or invoke to protect their rights, to fight against the discrimination, and this is cultural and educational rights. So this right, fundamental right, is mentioned in the articles from 29 to 30. Article 29 of the Indian Constitution and Article 30 deal with the cultural and educational rights. So as in case of the cultural and the educational right, in case of this cultural and the educational rights, the cultural and the religious minorities can actually have the right, religious minorities, the cultural and the religious minorities like Muslims or the Parsis, they have the right to be guardians of the content of their culture, and at the same time, this right gives them the authority, grants them the authority to make decisions on how best this content is to be preserved. So we talked about invoking fundamental rights. So far, we are done with how different groups, marginalized groups, invoke fundamental rights to protect their rights, to advance their interests, to fight oppression, to fight discrimination, and above all, to fight marginalization. Now moving to another, actually the means or the way that these marginalized groups resort to fight oppression, to fight marginalization, and that is the laws for the minorities. Students, there are several schemes, both central and the state governments have devised, have framed, have formed different schemes for the upliftment of the underprivileged sections of the society, means those sections of the society who are socially, economically, or educationally backward. So for example, government provides for free or the subsidized hostel facility for the students belonging to scheduled castes or scheduled tribes, so that they may avail the education which may not be available in their localities. So this is not the only thing, understand? Making schemes is not the only thing that the governments, be it the state governments or be it the central government, that are taken, that they make these schemes to advance the interests of the minorities or the marginalized groups. Rather, they devise certain, or they make certain policies, they make certain specific laws that further, that advance the interests of the minorities, that are used for the upliftment of the weaker sections of the society. And one such policy is reservation. So there is a system of reservation in for socially, educationally, and economically backward sections of the society. For example, there is reservation in jobs for these sections. There is reservation in education for these weaker sections of the society. Even there is reservation in the legislature, be it the Parliament of India, in Lok Sabha, for these weaker sections, and there is reservation for these weaker sections in the state legislative assemblies as well. So, for example, let me give you an example of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. They have, or we have one more category, and other categories, OBCs. So, OBCs are the backward classes. So, these are some of the marginalized sections of the society. They have, they have been given the reservation in education, in public employment, and for certain groups there is a reservation in parliament also, or in the state legislature also. So this reservation is largely given in proportion to their population in the society. So there is reservation for, as I said, for jobs, public employment for these groups. There is reservation for these groups in education, and there is reservation of seats or reservation in the parliament. For example, as of now, scheduled castes, they have 84 seats reserved in the Lok Sabha, in the Parliament of India. So there are 84 constituencies which are there, which are reserved for the candidates belonging to the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. They have 47 seats or constituencies reserved for this social group in the parliament, and there are also reservation in the state legislatures depending on their proportion of population in a particular state. So, so far we talked about two things: invoking fundamental rights and laws for the minorities, that how these are used by the marginalized groups to protect their rights, to fight against the discrimination, to fight against the marginalization. So in the next chapter, we'll be talking about two other things that we already talked about. For example, we'll be talking about protecting the rights of the these Dalits and the Adivasis, and then we'll be talking about, in the next lecture, about the Adivasi demands and the 1989 Act. So by now, this is all. Thank you. God bless you all.